Hello and welcome back, everyone. Happy Friday. Today we're going to be doing a rundown of Tinto Maps number 6, which covers Great Britain and Ireland. As we will discover, they are careful to do this distinction. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Pavia and the rest of the content design team are busy working on the feedback for the previous Tinto maps. Pretty excited with the level at which they're engaging with kind of people who are responding, making adjustments to the maps based on what people say. So I'm standing in for this week. I'm St. Dave, UK. It seems like they might have picked the right person for the job for talking about, Great Britain and Ireland. Some of you may have seen me here and there on the forums, mostly there, but the long story short is that I work on a very secret game whose name I'm contractually obligated to redact. That's right, and so here, even if we copy and paste this in to something, it's actually literally just boxes. It's not redacted, he didn't highlight over it, and it's secretly text under this. Unfortunately, we tried. We did our very best, and so we have to conclude, with the lack of a Happy Friday at the start of this, we have to conclude that the name of the game is actually not Europa Universalis 5. Also, just to be clear, this is 2 words. That's Europa Universalis Europa Universalis is 2 words, but Europa Universalis 5 is 3. And so we have to conclude that the name of the game is, in fact, Happy Friday. That's right, you get a double whammy, mostly because it's really hard to show Britain on its own in a screenshot, partly to sidestep the British Isles naming controversy, which is controversial, but mainly because the gameplay of them is so different. This part of Europa, look at him tease us like this. Project Teaser indeed, or Project Tizar. Divided into 2 distinct regions, Great Britain and Ireland. I thought about making a medium Britain joke, but I won't. So here we have the climate, which we see a little bit of continental. I was a little surprised to see continental, and then we see a little bit of Arctic. This is the first Arctic we've ever seen. The mild oceanic climate dominates the Isles, which Isles? Where it cools towards the inland Pennines and the Scottish Highlands, okay, whatever. We represent it. I don't know what this means. We represent it with the wintry, dry continental climate. So we see a little bit of Arctic even in Wales here. So that's pretty cool. But mostly oceanic. I was expecting to see it be like entirely oceanic, but I also don't know that much climate regarding this region. So let's continue on with topography. The Isles are dominated by the green and pleasant flatlands and low rolling hills. The peripheries are punctuated by rocky mountains and craggy highlands. Isn't there some swampland in... I thought there were some like boggy areas in Scotland. Am I... Maybe not, okay. We would like to add more impassable locations in northern England and the Scottish borders to make maneuvers a little more interesting and strategic, but would like suggestions from people more familiar with the Pennines. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of this stuff coming in here, but a book that I recently read, and I've been meaning to do a review on, where it talked about how the land was significantly different and not as good for industrialization, at least in Scotland, relative to, England. And this was pretty interesting. And I could have sworn they said something about it being like kind of boggy in some areas, but maybe that's represented by the thick forest rather than the woods of the south. But okay. Vegetation, great moors, bogs, and fens are represented by sparse vegetation. Meanwhile, much of the land is wooded. Okay. So this is supposed to be the bogs then, I guess? Meanwhile, much of the land is still wooded. Here, okay, interesting. That was super fascinating to read about why Scotland wasn't as good for industrialization, but then I think the book also had some commentary on how Scottish people in, I forget which city it was, on a per capita basis have more Nobel Literature Prizes than any other group, or this sort of thing. We see a lot of kind of farmlands down here in the south, which is going to be, I assume, territories that are just generally more valuable, because I'm still lacking any sort of evidence to the contrary, and having seen some modifiers that seem positive for certain things relative to other things, which that sounds like a bunch of words, but bear with me here. I think that farmlands are just going to be kind of the best territory, much like how they are in EU4, and so seeing the farmland in the south, I'm assuming it's going to just generally be more valuable, but probably the resource is going to be more important, much like the loud car outside. Okay, here we have raw materials. The raw goods situation aims to reflect the economic reality of medieval Britain. Yes. I feel like this sentence is saying something that I'm missing, but this is also just implied by the whole thing. Anyways, it's fine. Shepherding was common on every corner of the island. A lot of wool produced was sold to the industrial hub of the Low Candies to be manufactured into cloth, which turned back into the British market. Maybe the thing is emphasis is on medieval for this sentence, where they're not like having a bunch of coal, even though that was like later industrialization more of a thing. The further north we go, the less fertile the terrain, and as such, the greater reliance on pastoral farming as a livestock over wheat. I think that the pastoral nature of the thing was also a reason why they couldn't industrialize as well. I'm struggling to remember here because it's been now a couple weeks since I finished reading the book, but I believe that this was part of the factors, which is that it was easier to move people off of like subsistence farms than pastoral lands for the purposes of industrialization. The Western something to do with that, or the people who owned the land were more incentivized when they owned like farms instead of livestock or something like this. The western hills and valleys also expose it a greater number of mineral delights. We love those. Those are our favorite. We send our children there, including the historic stannery mines of Devon and Cornwall. So we do see, and this is always the map that is most interesting to me. We see a little bit of iron and coal. We see some tin, stone. We know that Lancashire actually has an enormous amount of raw resources, but that reality might not be as reflected in medieval Britain, right? We do see some coal there. We see quite a bit of wheat, and I guess this is a lot of wool just all throughout, especially more in the north, where we're seeing a combination of wool, livestock, and wild game in pretty high amounts. We also see a little bit of horses, some pearls. There's a lot of fish that dominates kind of a lot of the coastal spots. And so overall, the resource profile kind of doesn't look as good as normal. Now, we do have kind of these farmland areas, and it seems pretty farmland dense, so I imagine the land is still pretty good, generally speaking, from what metrics we have to evaluate how good land can be, which is basically none. But overall, like there's less resources that I think we're kind of excited about, right? There's less iron. We don't see basically any sort of gems, or I'm not seeing anything like to the extent of silver or gold or anything like this. It's just really, really livestock wool. It just dominates relative to some of the previous maps here. So that is a bit interesting. But we do have this. How many irons do we have here? Is this the only iron? Is this the only iron? I think this is the only iron. We see stone, coal. Oh, there's another iron here. Okay, well, very, very interesting. I wonder if that's going to strategically make it harder for Britain to field an army. We do see that they have a couple pockets of horses, and so cavalry, I assume, will not be a problem for them, but very interesting. I wonder if this affects... Maybe this is like a reason to go bowman. Like, okay, maybe this is historically informed of going bowman or something like this. I have no idea. We also see a ton of salt. I actually think this is way more salt over here, kind of on the western portion than we've seen kind of anywhere else. So that's perhaps noteworthy. Salt's depending on like the era, salt is like really, really important. I've been meaning to read a book on salt, and so this is maybe going to be a really valuable trade resource, and maybe that's where the value is in the salt, which a ton in Ireland. Okay, so Markets, as you can see from the two starting markets, Dublin and London, very cool. London and Dublin. Aside from London, we could have chosen almost any town from Aberdeen to Bristol. We chose Dublin as we chose Dublin as was the main trade center in Ireland, and also because it handsomely splits the Isles into east and west of the Pennines, demonstrating the impact the terrain can have on the dynamic market attraction. Okay, interesting. Terrain has on the... That is cool. Is this something that we've been aware of before? That I'm assuming it means harsher terrain is going to make it that effectively is going to hurt your ability to pull people into your market, something like this. They are both shades of red because they are both colored after the market center's top overlord country. Market control is a viable playstyle. We like to think of it as a form of map painting for country. For countries not focused on traditional conquest routes. I generally don't like conquering a whole bunch, so this is pretty cool. Although this isn't really how I play Victoria 3, because I just think, because it's not effective. Trying to do effective stuff. But okay, we also see a little bit of France, and we see this is the territory. Is this Calais here, or is Calais further up here? I'm not sure. But we do see a tiny little smidgen of English territory here. I almost said British, but it's not British at this point, right? It's still English in 1337. Or Norman French. We're at 1337. We're approaching calling them Norman French in terms of the timeline. Culture. We have decided to go with a monolithic English culture. We could have forced the introduction of a second Northumbrian or even a third Mercian culture. Mercian, I think. But typically they are not really considered separate people. What about the Norman French? Maybe actually that might have been the dynasty before the current one in 1337. I think I'm thinking like 1100s or 1200s. My knowledge of English history is not the best. The English, through diverse in origin with a variety of dialects, had already begun to coalesce in the face of the Viking invasion hundreds of years before. Scotland, conversely, is a real porridge of cultures. Is this a porridge joke? Real porridge of cultures. Do Scottish people eat a ton of porridge? Okay. The Lowland Scots, whose dialect of Northumbrian English that later develops into the Scots language, dominate the kingdom from their wealthy burghs and are gradually encroaching on the pastoral lands of the Gaelic Highlanders. The Norse Gaelic clansmen watch them from the Western Isles, with some old settlements remaining around Galloway. The far north, ironically called the Sutherland, that is ironic, retains some Norse presence. So we're seeing, in terms of the map, this is kind of what we're discussing. And so we see Highlands, Scots, English, Welsh, and Irish, of course. Wales, conquered for around a century by this point. That sounds about right, yeah. Plays a host to English burghers looking to make a few quid, as well as the descendants of Norman adventure knights in the March of Lordships, but is still majority Welsh, speaking from Anglesey to Cardiff. Anglo-Irish, representing the spectrum from the Cambro Norman Knights, I love he has another redacted thing, to the so-called Old English settlers, live in the great numbers in the south-east trading towns of Dublin and Cork, as well as in numbers in frontier outposts. The cosmopolitan towns of the Isles are home to people from elsewhere in Europe, most notably Flemish weavers from the Low Counties, though their numbers are too small to impact the map mode. That's pretty cool. Really, like, the lowland area was in a time period maybe from like the 1500s to like the 1700s. They really started to dominate in terms of economic activity, largely it had to do in large part due to the fact that they had waterways or navigable kind of more rivers, and don't know the correct way to describe it, but there's just like a ton of water terrain there by which you can navigate, which is the like cheapest and most effective way of transporting stuff. And as transporting stuff gets easier, that allows specialization to be more effective. And so this allows, instead of having a blacksmith who makes everything, you could have a blacksmith who only makes screws, and then he supplies it to the rest of the region. Allows specialization. Okay, shout out to Adam Smith. The Anglo-Irish. Okay, I think we talked about that. The Norman blank dominates as the blank for both kingdoms and their subject. What is that supposed to be? The Norman culture dominates the blank for both. Is this a dynastic thing? The conquest of 1066 is no longer fresh. Too soon. It's fresh in our hearts. But the continuing bonds between aristocratic classes of England, Scotland, and France have kept the French language alive and strong. All right. So, religion. I've decided that it's not even worth taking a screenshot of the religion map mode. Fair. There are tiny minorities of Jewish people in the Scottish and Irish towns. They have been expelled from England, but they are so small in number they don't register on the map mode. Other than that, it's all Catholic, but not for long. John Wycliffe entered the chat. Yep. Areas. Based on the 4 provinces of Ireland, Meath, and splitting England into roughly larger Anglo-Saxon earldoms, which would have had the similarity to modern regions. Yorkshire. We apologize to the nations here. So we do see kind of a nice looking split. This is actually so similar to Victoria III's states. I mean there's a few more states, but this is very reminiscent of that. Obviously because it's like describing the areas, but we do see a nice little provincial split here, or area split. And then we have fixed the colors of the provinces map mode so you can see individual provinces a bit more clearly. Cool. These are based on some historical counties which have remained fairly consistent throughout history, as most historical things do, while merging some things that are too small. We've almost certainly offended someone, as you do whenever you talk about anything related to British, United Kingdom, Ireland, especially Northern Ireland, or some people like to call it part of England. Someone's going to get offended. The ancient Scottish shires are pretty messy and difficult to coalesce into neat provinces, so any suggestion for a better arrangement there would be welcome. Okay, so now we have locations, which is the sharp. They've done this in a different order. Normally they lead with locations and then they go to the bigger and bigger things. Now they've led with the biggest thing and then they're going to the smaller and smaller things. But okay, you might notice that the locations in Ireland are varyingly written in both English and Irish. Yeah, that's weird. Someone's gonna not like that consistency. This is because we have had the new system up and running where we can name locations by the primary culture of the country they're owned by. Oh, cool. That makes sense. All right, fair enough. This means, for example, that London will be called Londres if it is ruled by a Catalan country. It is currently a work in progress feature that we might add more elements, such as game setting, to base the name on the dominant culture of the location instead, or to just use the default English names. Now, is that English language English, or is that English, British English? Who knows? Yeah, is it Constantinople, or is it, oh wait, what was the, oh my god, I'm so blanking on what it's called now, after the Ottoman Empire took over. Constantinople. It's Constantinople in my heart. Okay, government types. As with most Europe, most of the countries, that's gonna bother me so much, because I love making that joke. Okay, I like to ask people where one is located relative to the other, and they're the same country, so they're just separated by time, or not the same country, they're the same city. That's gonna bug me so much. Oh my god. As with most of Europe, most countries are currently under a monarchy or another, but the Irish 2/3 began with the tribe government type. This, among other mechanics such as redacted, helps to give them a very unique play style in Europe. We do see a lot of tribe. I want to say Antioch, but it's not Antioch. Countries. Okay, England. It's... Oh my god. England, of course, stands as the most dominant kingdom in the Isles, despite having a lot of power resting in the barons. We love ourselves some baronies, duchies, and etc. The county is fairly unitary even at this point, with very little practical separation between the crown's power somewhere like Kent versus Yorkshire. However, there are notable exceptions. The powerful Burgesses estate in the city of London enjoys ancient freedom from royal power, while the king peers in from the crown seat of power in the neighboring Westminster. The county's Palatine of Durham is not represented by any country, but by buildings that give the clergy estate a huge amount of power in locations it's present in. Interesting. This also ties into political gameplay as a redacted. The newly created Duchy of Cornwall, the only duchy in England at the time, would also not be represented well by the Cornwall country, being a disparate set of manorial buildings that ironically mostly in Devon. Cornwall, of course, exists as a releasable country, though. Okay. The Isle of Man is less certain. For now, we have it as a subject of England. On paper, it was a kingdom awarded to William Montagu, the king's favorite. However, we aren't sure if it actually wielded any real power on the Isle. It changed hands between England and Scotland numerous times in this period, but in practice, it appears to have been governed by a local council of barons. Any more detail on exactly what was going on here in the time period would be greatly appreciated. So if you know what was going on then, feel free to give them some info. These decisions have been made because England heaves itself out of the feudal system. We thought it would be best if the small fry inward-looking internal politicking is handled through the estates and redacted systems. My favorite. I think, is this cultural something? I really want Victoria 3 to have a cultural system, so I'll be so excited if there's a cultural system that is, for now, redacted. And then the diplomacy tracks are freed up for the English player to behave more outwardly against other major countries. Okay, so we have Wales, which is subjugated. Although subjugated by conquest, as it was, Wales is not formally annexed into the Kingdom of England until around the mid-1500s. As such, the principality begins as a dominion subject under England. Notably, I think that Wales had all the iron, or one of the irons was maybe right outside of Wales. That's interesting to think about. Those familiar with Welsh history will note that the Principality of Wales didn't extend much beyond the Old Kingdom of Gwynedd. I'm really not going to pronounce the Welsh stuff correctly. Much of their country to the southwest was in fact ruled by the Marcher Lords, which we represent with a powerful nobility estate in the valleys and beyond. There's an alternative vision of Wales I would like to gauge opinion on. Okay, so whether or not people give feedback on this, if they have strong opinions, might influence the game, and that is expanding it to include the earldom of Chester and the marches on the English side of the modern border. If you are an Englishman familiar with modern borders, this might look alarming. But those lands were also constitutionally ambiguous parts of the Welsh marches until 1500s. This will hand over to the Wales player full responsibility of dealing with the Marches Lords, allowing England to focus on the bigger pictures like beating France, as one does. Ireland. Ireland is going through a moment of change. English power is centered in the lordship of the Pale, the king's dominion ruling out of Dublin Castle. However, it struggles to keep a grasp on the rebellious Hiberno-Norman earls scattered about the island, some of whom remain as vassals, some of whom have managed to slip free of royal control, as one does. The Tanistry system of succession endemic to the Gaelic Irish has its advantages, but can also lead to chaotic feuds between rival branches. The so-called Burke Civil War had fractured the powerful earldom of Ulster into rival Burke cousins who jealously feuded over their shrinking lordships in Connaught. Native Irish princes of the north have reconquered most of their own lands from de Burghs, but there's also two rival O'Neill cousins who style themselves King of Tyrone on either side of River Bann. The feuding Irish lack a unifying figure, but anyone powerful enough could theoretically claim the title of High King. So this will be interesting. Yeah, there's a ton of different countries here, right? The former provincial kingdoms, such as Meath and Connaught, enjoy the elevated rank of duchy, giving them a slight edge in the high kingship selection. So the Thunderdome will probably be an interesting place to play in. The Chancellor for Scotland, the Chancellor Edward Balliol, continues his attempt for a Scottish throne with England's tacit permission. It's hard to determine the exact lands held by Balliol in 1337, the date where the game starts, but we know his disinherited loyalists hold out the castle of Perth, while his English allies had seized large tracts of lowlands from Bruce. Balliol had also bought the loyalty of MacDonald and the other Hebridean galley lords by granting them remote island on the west coast of the mainland. Meanwhile, Scotland's canny regent, Sir Andrew de Moray, launches his decisive counterattack. Man, there's so much more description in this one than there's been in previous one. Against true king David II de Bruce, waits in exile in France. Okay, so we see Balliol and we see Scotland. That is interesting. Kingdom of England, of course. All these Irish miners here. And, okay. Dynasties. We know about the Plantagenet, Balliol, and Bruce, so I've zoomed in on the map of Ireland to show the ruling dynasties. And someone said I pronounced Plantagenet wrong, and it's Plantagenet. I think that might be it. Anyways, on the last video, ruling dynasties on various chiefdoms and earls, and so we do see a little bit of an interesting. Oh, we do see a little Plantagenet there. As far as population, really love it when they do it by country, because this is a lot easier to parse. And man, so Scotland, or the two nations that are in Scotland currently, barely 400,000 to England's 5.3 million. Really large population here, which kind of gives a bit more of an indication of kind of what's going on. All the farmlands down here too, right? So, and then here we have the map that's impossible to look at and just hurts my eyes, but it's showing the province, it's showing the population literally everywhere. I think we see down in England, is that like... So we see 125,000, 153, 168. Is this kind of where London's at? Is London inland like this? I thought that London was around here. But okay. This seems to be the highest pop density spot. I'm glad we could at the very least zoom in on that somewhat. Well, that's it for now. As always, the team is eagerly awaiting your feedback and looking forward to the discussions. We'll try to keep on top of the thread, but we have team building activity this afternoon, so it might be a little more sporadic than usual. I wonder what they do for team building activity. Next week is Anatolia. Oh my god. What's the name? Istanbul. That's the name. That's it. Oh my god. It's Istanbul. Yeah. That's one of my favorite things, is to ask people, geographically speaking, where's Istanbul relative to Constantinople, right? Now I'm not even sure if it's Istanbul. I'm pretty sure it's Istanbul. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. We'll be continuing to go over these every Friday, as long as there's an interest in them. And other than that, y'all have a happy Friday. Big nice.